My name is Robin Davis, and the article I've chosen is entitled Assessing Essays. As a secondary English education major, this article was of particular interest to me. It came from the Center for the Study of Higher Education and was written by Kate Beattie and Richard James. It was of particular interest to me as a secondary English education major because language arts teachers are often required to grade and assess student writing projects and student writing assignments. These assignments, I believe, can be somewhat subjective and maybe more difficult than some other types of assignments to become objective about and to establish a rubric for and particular things that you will need to do in grading these assignments. The article gives you three major points at the beginning of the essay, and they are that the primary goals in assessing written work are to gauge the extent of student learning and to provide feedback to the student. Grading itself is a secondary goal. Secondly, essay topics and written assignments are well crafted when they allow students suitable scope to demonstrate their learning. And thirdly, the learning which students are expected to demonstrate should be made clear to them at the onset of the assignment. Now, for the actual assessment of the assignment, first you should devise a grading scheme before you start marking. You do not start grading these written assignments before you determine how you're going to mark them. Some of the criteria you should use should be research, content, analysis, structure, syntax, literary qualities, and originality. And there should be a point system devised for each of those areas of the assessment. A grading scheme will help you be objective and consistent if you do that up front. You should give some credit for layout and presentation, but just because it looks good does not mean that the substance is good. You should grade that as well, and maybe even heavier than the presentation itself. If a word limit has been set for an essay assignment, then you need to make that clear and determine beforehand what will be done on the assessment if the essay is too short or too long. Remember that feedback is an important part of the learning process, and your grading scheme should be standard for the student should be clear. Sometimes using a model before the assignment is given is a great help. And if any of you have had Dr. McNabb in the English department, she is notorious for giving you sample documents for most of her assignments, and they are very helpful. That way the students know exactly what a top-rate essay would look like in your eyes. If you give the students guidance, then you will get better answers. This probably means that they have learned more when you get those good answers. Assessing the papers and providing students with feedback means that you should assess and return the essays and the other written work promptly. This way, the process as well as the product is still fresh in their minds. They can always review the product when you return it to them, but if you assess it early on, then the process is still fresh in their minds as well. You need to avoid prejudices and biases towards individual students. If you know a particular student usually writes well, try not to let that sway you in grading their papers, or to try not to compare that student's papers to the other students. On the other hand, when you write comments, be mindful that students like for you to be individual, and you need to ask yourself what comments will help this particular student in improving their writing essays. Read an essay thoroughly before you begin marking, because you may get an idea about the paper before you finish it, and then that idea could change. You may even want to use a pencil when you're marking so that you can go back and change some of your assessment if you feel it's necessary at the end. Some of the things that you can ask about the essay is, does your student understand what they're writing about? Are they addressing and answering the question? How well do they use evidence? and you need to check bibliographies and footnotes, and always watch for plagiarism. Make sure your students know where you stand on plagiarism before they start the writing assignment. As far as possible, make your comments constructive. Never use sarcasm when assessing and making comments on the student's written paper. Students have the right to expect that you will give them their strengths as well as their weaknesses, and not just their weaknesses when you are assessing their papers. They appreciate a personal touch, and always use them by name, and then sign your name on the assessment. Even though they know you are the teacher and you are the assessor, it becomes more personal when you sign your name to that. You need to spend some time on fluency, grammar, and spelling, and remember that you are justified in assessing how they communicate as well as the knowledge of their subject matter. Be aware of grading and assessing written documents when you're tired and fatigued. That can play a part. If you're reading the same subject matter over and over, you can become weary of that. You need to maintain a standard of objectivity on every student's papers, not just the ones that you do at the beginning of a grading session. Maybe take a break and then come back and read some of those later. Lastly, on the grading itself, you should question your assessment practices and techniques while you're grading. If a lot of students tend to fail a particular essay, maybe you didn't give instructions as well, maybe they don't understand the content in the subject area, or maybe you did not give sufficient instructions on the essay itself. A good example is that recently when many of us did poorly on a quiz, Mr. Kraft went back and reviewed that and even adjusted that grade to fit what we understood and went over that material again. On the other hand, if most of your students do too well, then the assessment and the assignment was probably not strict enough or challenging enough. Always keep in mind when you're assessing essays that you are evaluating your teaching as well. Assessment tasks should closely reflect the learning that the course is designed to encourage. And sometimes essays are not the best vehicle for evaluating what a student has learned on a particular assignment. You may need to find another assessment type to use on particular assignments. And just always keep in mind that you can be objective and make essay effective for many types of subject areas.